the rhetoric, the propaganda, all the high-sounding words are hiding a very precarious economic conditions of our country. Mr. Speaker, I would like to start off by looking at what has been described as fiscal discipline and to paint the picture of our current rising risk in terms of our fiscal environment. Mr. Speaker, in the IMF's own statement, and here I want to indicate that what IMF did was not for Ghana to exit, but the IMF gave us a condition to waive us meeting the conditions that we're supposed to meet in order to exit. In other words, Ghana entered a classroom to write an exam. We were supposed to write exams in 3 years. In 3 years' time, we said we're not ready.
Yeah,
We were given another 1 year to come and write the exam. We still said we're not ready. Then we wrote to the IMF to say that we want you to give us a waiver for non-observance of performance criteria. And the IMF says, go and say no more. Mr. Speaker, you come to celebrate this. Mr. Speaker, when you beg somebody to forgive you not to meet conditions, and the IMF letter is very clear. It's a response to a waiver for non-observance of performance criteria. Mr. Speaker, you have failed an exam. You have been asked to live your life because you can't pass it. And today you are here praising yourself. Mr. Speaker, when I heard that hat trick, I knew that was a hat trick of embarrassment. But Mr. Speaker, the truth of the matter is, we are worse than we entered the IMF. And that is a fact. Mr. Speaker, in 2016, our total weight bill was 14 billion Ghana cedis, Mr. Speaker. Today, we are dealing with 22 billion Ghana cedis, an expansion of 63% in the public sector. Mr. Speaker, on the average, we are adding 21% to our public weight bill every year. Mr. Speaker, if this continues, by the year 2020, we will have doubled our weight bill that we left in 2016. Mr. Speaker, that is the height of indiscipline. That is the height of indiscipline. And yet, the finance minister says he is right-sizing government. How type of right-sizing is this? That you right-size to increase your weight bill by 63%. Mr. Speaker, that is a worrying sign for our country. Mr. Speaker, in 2017 on this house, the Minister of Finance came and said he was reprofiling our public debt in order to reduce our interest payment. Mr. Speaker, I am sad to report that our debt payment, our interest payment on our debt has increased from 11 billion to 15.8 billion in 2018, and it is projected to hit 18.6 billion, Mr. Speaker. We are adding 7.6 billion to our interest cost, Mr. Speaker, and we are celebrating this. Mr. Speaker, when you add our weight bill to that of our interest cost, Mr. Speaker, you get a figure that consumes our entire tax revenue. And Mr. Speaker, the finance minister should be worried. Because when you spend all your tax revenue on 2 line items, you should be worried. Mr. Speaker, when you now add how much we spent in 2018 on statutory funds to what we spend on interest costs and wages and salaries, Mr. Speaker, we get a figure of 52 billion. Mr. Speaker, our total revenue, including grants, what we went and begged foreigners to give us, was only 47 billion. Mr. Speaker, 5 billion of our weight bill, 5 billion of our interest cost put together was financed through borrowing, Mr. Speaker. We borrowed to pay wages and salaries. We borrowed to pay interest costs by 5 billion Ghana cedis. And Mr. Speaker, you are celebrating this. Mr. Speaker, what is worrying? Mr. Speaker, what is worrying is the fact that goods and services, there is nothing now left to pay for goods and services, and we go to borrow to pay for goods and services. So, Mr. Speaker, if you take goods and services together, you take the difference in wages and salaries, we are borrowing 10.6 billion every year to pay for consumption. Mr. Speaker, you are leaving a debt for our children without an asset, and you are celebrating it. Mr. Speaker, it is so serious, Mr. Speaker, it is so serious that if you look at the utilization If you look at the utilization of the last 2 euro bonds, it is better if you go to the euro bond in 2016 and 17. Because if this is what you are going to be doing, Mr. Speaker, this country is doing. In 2017, Mr. Speaker, domestically financed capital expenditure, where we spend our euro bond, was 1.6 billion. Mr. Speaker, that domestic finance expenditure included 1.1 billion that we got from ABFA to finance capital expenditure. What it means is that the difference of 500 million Ghana cedis was what we spent our euro money on. If you compare that, that was 190 million, approximately 120 million out of 750 million was spent on consumption from Europe. You go to the capital market to borrow and spend on consumption. Mr. Speaker, 630 million of our euro bond of 750 million was spent on consumption. And Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Finance should be worried. Mr. Speaker, the current bond that we have just issued, if you look at the domestically financed component of our capital budget, it stands at 3.22 billion Ghana cedis. Mr. Speaker, we have budgeted 1.27 billion Ghana cedis from ABFA to fund that expenditure. There's a difference of 2 billion Ghana cedis to be financed with Europe. Mr. Speaker, when you convert that figure at the rate of 5 cedis to the dollar, you are going to get $390 million, approximately $400 million. Mr. Speaker, 1.6 billion of what we went and brought is going into consumption. Mr. Speaker, the country is getting very wet. Mr. Speaker, this is the height of indiscipline in the management of our resources, that we go on the market to borrow expensive money just to come and spend it on goods and services, spend it on consumption, and we are here celebrating this level of incompetence. Mr. Speaker, we are very well. Mr. Speaker, I want today to make this point emphatically clear that no investor that invests for 7 years, invests for 12 years, invests for 30 years, would invest in the competence of the current government. Mr. Speaker, this current government has only 2 years to live. You have only 2 years to live. An investor is investing into successive governments over 30 years, and you say it is because of you. Mr. Speaker, when somebody invests long term, you will invest long term on account of the work that has been done by successive governments to create prosperity for the country in the future. Mr. Speaker, they went to the market telling the investor that Ghana is now joining the league of bigger oil producing nations. They told the investor that Ghana will be producing 500,000 barrels of oil by 2020, and the investor invested in this 500,000 barrels. Show me 1 liter of Akufado's oil in the 500,000 barrels. Show me 1 liter of Akufado's oil in the 500,000 oil that made them invest. Mr. Speaker, this part of politicizing what is obviously a prosperity for Ghana is neither here nor there. Mr. Speaker, if you want to know the confidence that investors are showing in this current incompetent government, look to the 2-year and 1-year bond. That reflects the number of years you are left to run a government. And if an investor wants to come in because you are competent, he will come now and exit by 2020 because he doesn't know who will become the next government. Then he will invest in your competence. Mr. Speaker, the last 2 months, when Ghana went out to borrow, Mr. Speaker, on the domestic bond, we used to get 30% participation by foreign investors. That was a sign of confidence. Today, we got only 6.3% participation. That is your mark. 6%. And that is the confidence they have in you. Mr. Speaker, I am very surprised that the minister was silent on the energy situation. Doomsor is back. Mr. Speaker, the level of vulnerability of our country, as we speak today, Mr. Speaker, Bloomberg is reporting today, as of today, Bloomberg is reporting that Ghana's currency remains the worst performing currency in Africa. That as of today. And as of this morning, Mr. Speaker, the cedi is going for 5.4. That is why they are struggling 5.5 now. Mr. Speaker, you have been pumping painkillers on this cedi. Very soon, the painkiller will leave the system, and the pain will come back. Mr. Speaker, let us find sustainable ways of protecting our economy. and take the country outside this incompetent group of people who are mismanaging and are fiscally indisciplined. Mr. Speaker, you listen well.